Anyway, this quote is from the book of Daniel. Give us the vegetables to eat, water to drink. Always good advice. Yes, there we go. Diet and cancer, burning down the house or putting out the flames. And the reason I came up with that title is because oftentimes when people are challenged with cancer, one of the side effects of the immune activation that occurs with cancer is that the body, that many people lose their appetite. And unfortunately, conventional oncologists will tell them, I don't care what you eat as long as you eat enough. That is the worst possible advice because it is the equivalent of throwing kerosene on a fire when you have the fire department trying to put the fire out. You don't want to continue eating the foods and doing the things that caused you to develop the cancer in the first place and that are fanning the flames of the cancer. We need to stop the diet habits that created and promoted the cancer and switch to the kind of diet that helps us avoid the cancer altogether. And this is a quote from the book of Proverbs, and there's your pepperoni. A man's own folly ruins his life, yet his heart rages against the Lord. Because what happens when we get cancer? Oh Lord, God, why me? As though it's God's fault. And the reason is what you see here. All this poison that we have put in these bodies that God has given us. So we've got to understand that what we do determines what happens to us to a large extent. So here is Gigi's story.
Hi, so today I'm here with Gigi Jones, who's from Kansas City. We met at Hippocrates Health Institute. We were both doing the health educator training, and she's gonna share with us today how she cured herself from cancer only using pure plant-based food. So Gigi, when did you first come here?
Well, in February of 2016. Actually, I was diagnosed with cancer in August of 2015, and my doctors wanted me to have surgery. They stated that it was in a state of emergency because of where the cancer was located, positioned in my body. And of course, it was positioned in my large intestines, and I had planned to have surgery actually, and but there was something inside of me that said there's another way. And the morning of my surgery, I prayed and meditated all night long and just wanted just to spend time with myself and make sure that I'm making the right decision. And you know, that morning when I woke up for surgery, I felt a much higher power that spoke to me and said if I choose this path that I would truly die, and for me to do my research. And I did. I decided to search of ways of healing cancer, and basically what I wanted to do was search for a way to figure out what caused this to happen to me in the first place. What caused my cancer? Because it was caused by something, you know. Cancer doesn't run in my family. No one I knew at that time, our family line had cancer. And
so it was not genetic at all?
No, not at all. And from that, I ran across the China study, and they were talking about foods and how food can heal the body and how you can turn cancer on and cancer off.
So before that, you had no idea?
I had no idea.
I had
no idea. But I knew some things that was going on in my life. For instance, I was stressed out. I ate lots of meats. good prime meat, actually. So I thought. I was living a lifestyle that I thought was healthy, but it really wasn't. It wasn't at all. But what I did find out was that living a plant-based lifestyle, I can actually reverse my disease. And so I decided to follow that path. I learned how to grow sprouts. I learned how to grow wheatgrass. I heard that those different, from wheatgrass to sprouts, help to, cure or get the body at ease. I want to say an at ease state, for healing. I decided to go vegan, plant-based vegan, meaning that I ate nothing but plants, all living foods.
So you stopped eating all meat, you went totally plant-based.
Exactly.
You started drinking wheatgrass.
Of course, it was also plant-based, living foods, raw diet.
So nothing
All
cooked.
raw. Nothing cooked whatsoever. Everything was living, packed with protein as well as enzymes. And I learned how to eat. Yeah, I learned how to eat all over again. And to me, before I thought it was going to be hard, but however, my mind was made up, and I had to help myself and help my body, and I had to realize that that everything starts with what we put in our mouths.
Were you also taking some kind of medication while you were going through this process, or was it completely through food that you cured yourself?
It was completely through food.
So you
I
gave
had
up all medication?
Absolutely. I had no chemotherapy. I refused that. I refused the medications, and I refused surgery.
Wow.
And and I did it through,
That's so inspiring.
living foods.
That's so inspiring.
All raw diet, green juice, wheatgrass.
And how did you know that you finally gotten it out of your body?
Yeah.
And how long did it take you?
Actually, it took from February of 2016 to May of 2016. I went back to the doctor and I had another colonoscopy. And what they found was the dye where the cancer was, and they did not find cancer at all. And then I decided to go get a second opinion like I did before, and the same result. And
That's incredible.
yeah, the dye is there, but the cancer isn't there anymore. Yeah. So
If you want to know more about Gigi, you can follow her on Gigi the Vegan on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
That's a pretty amazing story, and I'm just going to tell you guys. I don't know that I would have had the courage to do what this woman did. I probably would have went in with a knife from my house saying, "Cut this out of me." But now that I've heard her story and Emmanuel's story, God forbid that I should be challenged by anything like that. I will say I had a colonoscopy; it was clean. Hallelujah. But if I were, I'd be willing to give this a try, because you guys are going to hear these stories, and there are common elements to these stories. And the common elements are, I went raw vegan for at least 6 months and the tumors regressed. And ladies and gentlemen, we can't ignore that. We can't say it is not what conventional medicine teaches us. But Gigi invited me last year to the very first Veg Fest that was held in Kansas City, Missouri, because she put it on. Because that's how inspired she was, and that's where I met her and heard her story. And I'm telling you, this is why I had to do this lecture, because people have got to know this is possible. I am tired of seeing people die because they don't know what's possible. And they're being sent down this pathway of toxic drugs and conventional treatment that has as its end a gravestone. So let's talk about what exactly is cancer, because there's a lot of confusion. People talk about cancer. Let's get a cure for cancer. Well, the first thing to understand is that cancer is not one disease. Cancer is, in fact, many diseases. Cancer can develop in any of the various tissues that make up our bodies. And while there are similarities amongst the diseases in terms of their character and how they act, the type of cancer that develops in your skin versus that develops in your colon versus what develops in your blood versus what develops in your lung are different. These diseases behave differently, and that's why they oftentimes have to be treated differently. A cell becomes cancerous when it begins to divide and proliferate uncontrollably and begins to invade surrounding tissues. So what do I mean by that? Well, if on the way home tonight, as we're walking out of the building, you stumble, fall, and skin your knee, and you look at your knee and the skin has been peeled away and there's this raw spot, what's going to happen is you're going to bleed, the blood is going to coagulate, form a scab, and underneath that scab, your skin cells are going to start to proliferate, regenerate, cover over that area, and once they start touching each other, they're going to stop multiplying, and they're going to basically seal up that wound and mature as skin cells. The scab will peel off, and then you have new skin, and you go on about your business. What happens with cancer is that instead of stopping the proliferation when they begin to touch other cells, they continue to grow, and instead of remaining in the place where they belong, they can start to invade other tissues, and worst of all, they can actually break off from their origin site and travel through either the blood or lymphatic system to other parts of your body and start to grow tumors in those areas as well. And Ted, if there's anything that you want to add or correct, feel free to jump in.
Thank you.
You're
doing great, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
We have a radiation oncologist here as well.
Oh, cool. All right, awesome. So, and you feel free to add anything if there's something important. So, cancer actually means crab. It was named by the Greek physician Hippocrates, and you can see those little invading legs. He thought that looked like a crab, and that's why and how the disease got its name. So, experts estimate that 30 to 50% of the cancers that we see in Western countries, including the United States, could be prevented by changes in our diet and lifestyle, and I personally think that estimate is probably low. Leading causes of cancer and cancer death in the United States, the number one cancer for both men and women is lung cancer. And of course, the primary risk factor for that is smoking. However, a significant number of lung cancers do occur in people who have never smoked. Now, this could be due to secondhand smoke, but it also may be due to environmental exposures to things like radon or toxins in the air, in the environment. Air pollution has been shown to be a link. The second leading causes of cancer in men and women are what are called the hormone-related cancers. So in women, it's breast cancer. In men, it's prostate cancer. And then the third leading cause of cancer in both men and women in the U.S. is colorectal cancer. And the fourth and the fastest increasing cause of cancer in the United States is pancreatic cancer. And pancreatic cancer is directly related to these disgustingly calorie-dense, high-fat, high-meat diets that people are eating, and that are also low in protective plant foods. Breast, prostate, pancreatic, and colon cancers have all been shown to be increased by diets that are high in animal protein and animal fat, while also being low in whole grains, legumes, multicolored vegetables, and fruits. Only about 5% of the cancers in the United States are due exclusively to genetic causes, and the vast majority are due to lifestyle factors. And I can't emphasize that enough. What you do matters. So we've already seen the case of a woman who cured herself of colon cancer with a plant-based diet. In this lecture, I'm going to present several other cases of people who were able to do the same thing. And how is this possible? Did these people have a magic shaman? Did they go to some voodoo priestess who did an incantation over them? No. These cases are not flukes. One of the reasons that they were able to do this is that plant foods can prevent and even reverse disease. Cancer is a disease of disordered, uncontrolled cell growth. And in this lecture, we will look at the dietary factors that cause and promote unregulated abnormal cellular proliferation that can lead to the development of both benign and cancerous tumors. It will become clear what dietary factors have been shown by medical research to help create and exacerbate cancers, and which factors can help prevent and maybe even reverse this disease. So the first thing I need you guys to understand, and the first thing I want you to do, is to lose your romantic relationship with food. Okay? Because when we think of food, we think of it in an emotional sense, because we have, as humans, we have an emotional relationship with food. Food are holidays. Food is a first date or a remembered date with a loved one. Food is, celebration of a graduation or a wedding. Food for human beings is much more than just nutrition or sustenance. And if you're confused about that, let me give you an example. Let's say I invited you guys over my house for dinner. Okay? Said next Wednesday, would y'all come over to my house for dinner? And you guys said, oh, sure, Dr. Mills, that'll be fun. And you showed up at my door and you knocked on the door, and I didn't come immediately. You knocked on it again. And finally, after about 5 minutes, I came. And I'm scratching my head, and I got on a T-shirt and some ratty pajama bottoms, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, was that today? All right, come on in. And then I lead you guys into the kitchen, and there's a sink full of dirty dishes, and I rummage around and pull out a pot that has some oatmeal left over from the morning, and I pull out a big spoon, scrape it out, and then I plop it onto the floor and say, bon appetit. You guys would be not only insulted, but furious. My dog, however, would be delighted. That's the difference of what food means to us and other animals. There is a lot of emotional freight that we carry with this food, and we need to get rid of that and realize that food's fundamental purpose is to be a vehicle for the delivery of needed nutrients and energy to our bodies. And so the questions we all have to ask when we look at a particular piece of food is, what is this going to do for me? What is this going to do to improve my health and help me fight off disease? And if the answer is like that no good girlfriend or boyfriend you got rid of a few years ago, then we need to leave that stuff alone. So food is a bunch of chemicals that just happen to taste good. And we have to realize that our genes have had a much longer history experiencing interaction with these nutritive chemicals than they have with any of the pharmaceutical compounds we shovel into our mouth whenever we're not feeling well. And that in terms of the amount of chemical compounds that we will ingest over a lifetime, nothing comes close to the amount of food that we eat. Okay? Now, if I gave you a bottle of pills and told you take these pills, you quite naturally ask me, first of all, what the heck is it? What is it going to do to me? And I'm not sure if I want to take this, because you realize that whatever that pill is, it's going to affect your health. Well, you got to understand that food has that same power, and even more so. And when it comes to amounts, you're going to ingest a whole lot more food than whatever bottle of pills I give you. So if you're going to exercise caution about taking a pill, gosh darn it, I really want to say something else. Gosh darn it, you need to exercise caution about the food you eat. Okay? And that's especially important if you're raising children. Because I put a post on my webpage that said, if you take your children to McDonald's or Wendy's or KFC or Burger King, you're like a crack addict taking their child down to the crack house to learn how to smoke crack. You're just as bad. You know it's not healthy. You know it's destructive to your health. Why are you going to teach such an awful habit to your child? It's a kind of evil. The influence of diet and nutritive chemicals on our health and longevity are mediated, at least in part, through their impact on through their epigenetic effects on our familial genome. And we're going to talk about epigenetics a little bit later. This means that with respect to preventing and or treating diseases like cancers, the theoretical and practical benefits of understanding the relationship between food and health are literally enormous. And this is just a quote here. says, and this is from 2007 report of the World Cancer Research Fund and American Institute for Cancer Research. Says the main outcomes are that the suggested dietary guidance where evidence is sufficiently, that they suggest that we follow dietary guidance where the evidence is sufficiently compelling, would include limiting or avoiding dairy products to reduce the risk of prostate cancer, limiting or avoiding alcohol to reduce the risk of cancers of the mouth, pharynx, larynx, esophagus, colon, rectum, and breast, avoiding red and processed meat to reduce the risk of cancers of the colon and rectum and other places, avoiding grilled, fried, and broiled meats to reduce the risk of cancers of the colon, rectum, breast, prostate, kidney, and pancreas, consumption of soy products during adolescence to reduce the risk of breast cancer, in addition, and to reduce the risk of recurrence of breast cancer, and decrease mortality for women who have previously been treated for breast cancer. See, again, the nonsense you read on the net says, oh, if you've had cancer, you need to avoid soy. No, soy is protective, and it will reduce your risk for recurrence even if you've been challenged by breast cancer. Emphasizing how important fruits and vegetables are to reduce the risk of several common forms of cancer. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this was 2007. This was 13 years ago. They're telling us, ditch the dead crap and eat plants. And people don't do it, and then they get cancer, and they go, oh, Lord, why me? Well, because your head is like a brick. You don't listen. All right, so let's talk about how did cells become transformed into cancer cells. So normal body cells can acquire damage to their DNA through internal or external sources. And what's important to understand is that our bodies are constantly being assaulted by oxidative stress, free radicals, both from the environment and from endogenous processes that are occurring through just daily living. But the good news is that we have within our cells DNA repair mechanisms that find and correct this damage under normal circumstances so that the damage is not transmitted to daughter cells when these cells divide. However, if the mutation is not corrected, it can lead to additional mutations that make the cell begin to behave abnormally, and it loses its inhibition about dividing uncontrollably, and it loses its inhibition. It's like we've all had like neighbors that we couldn't stand because they didn't know when to go home or how to stay home. And this is like the cancer cells. They lose that home training and that common sense, and they begin to divide uncontrollably, to run around the neighborhood causing trouble, and pretty soon you got a cancer on your hands. And if these cancer cells are not recognized and destroyed by our body's immune system, then they can grow into tumors, metastasize, and spread throughout our bodies. Well, he says the new food labels are a bit more candid, but hey, don't let that bother you. What do you want to order? He should have ran out screaming. So let me ask you a question. What is the natural diet for these animals?
Grass.
So plants, right? All right. What is the point in their lives when they eat animal protein?
Infancy.
All right, I hear never.
Nursing.
When they're nursing, when they're babies. That is the point in their life when they're eating animal protein. So what does that tell you about animal protein?
Proliferates growth.
That it is a growth stimulant for plant-based animals, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys don't walk out of here with any other thing that you remember, I need you to remember that. Animal protein for a plant-based animal is a growth signal. When the body sees animal protein, it interprets that as, I need to try and grow. Well, that's a wonderful signal if you're a human being that weighs, 12 and a half pounds and is about 3 feet long. But if you are an adult human, your body should not be attempting to grow. because it can't grow. All right, anybody have any questions about that? Does that make sense? No, let me rephrase it. Does that not make sense to anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, it does make sense, and because of that, the cow's milk has way more growth hormones and different kinds than human mother's milk, or a kangaroo, or a kitty cat.
Oh, well, absolutely. Yes. So, young lady back there with love on her t-shirt. What happens if I give you a energy bar that has whey in it? Whey, cow's milk protein. What's going to happen in your body? When you digest and absorb that whey protein, what will happen in your body?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. What did I just tell you animal protein does to your cells?
Oh, it'll make everything grow.
It'll make it try to grow. But can your cells actually grow?
Well,
Should they be trying to
should
grow?
be done growing, right?
Exactly. So what begins to happen? They start to form tumors. And those tumors are not necessarily cancer, which is why everybody's got moles, cysts in their breasts, a prostate the size of New Jersey, lipomas, skin tags. This all comes from eating all of this animal protein that is forcing our cells to try and do what they shouldn't be doing. When you guys hear the testimony from Donna Green Goodman, she's going to talk about how she had problems with fibrocystic disease that cleared up when she changed her diet. Because when she was no longer overstimulating her cells, they stopped trying to grow. So the majority of the yes, ma'am.
In regard to the same question, whey is consumed by a lot of muscle builders. And at my age, I'm told, well, you have to tone your muscle, and isn't that supposed to grow?
No, and we're going to talk about the difference between growth and hypertrophy. You want your muscles to hypertrophy, meaning you want the individual fibers to get bigger, but you don't want those muscle cells to try and grow. And you're right that a lot of bodybuilders do use whey and other animal protein because it serves as a growth stimulant, but they pay the price later on. Have you seen Arnold Schwarzenegger lately?
Oh my God.
He looks like, I said, have you seen Arnold Schwarzenegger lately? It looks like he's been tied behind a truck and dragged behind something for a few miles. Bodybuilders' bodies wear out because they basically they accumulate so much oxidative damage that their cells give out. And many of them end up suffering cardiac failure from congestive heart failure because of the damage, the cumulative damage that is done over the years. So, huh? Yes, he is, thankfully. But it's like once you send your skin to the tanner to be turned into leather, I mean, you might get it back and say, I'm not going to do that anymore, but you still got leather. Yeah. Did I see another hand? All right, so let's move on. Well, this, I just wanted to show you that, and this is just really quick. I don't have time to really delve into this, but for those who are listening and for those of you here, you can go to YouTube, and I have a lecture there called Are Humans Designed to Eat Meat? And it goes into extreme detail on why human beings are plant eaters. But basically, what I want to point out to you is that the meat eaters have very, very short digestive tracts, a very short colon, whereas the plant eaters have a very long small intestine and a long pouched large intestine. And that's because plant foods take a lot more time to process and to extract the nutrients from. And unfortunately, meat is very easily and quickly digested. And what's left over has no more nutritive value. It can only rot if it stays in a warm, moist environment. And that's why they get it out of their bodies very quickly. When it's put in here, it stays in here way too long. And it stays in contact with your digestive tract far too long. And all of those toxins start to injure and damage your intestinal tract. And that's another reason people start to develop polyps, diverticulosis, and ultimately cancers. because these things are staying in the body too long. And this just points out all of the differences, anatomical differences between carnivores, the omnivore, herbivores, frugivores, and humans. And you can see we clearly don't have the anatomy for eating meat. And when people say, well, what about my canines? I'm like, what about them? You can't do anything with that but tear open an envelope, please. All right. So let's talk about the various risk factors for cancer. Animal protein, as I said before, plant-eating animals should only be exposed to animal protein when they're growing, when they're nursing. Animal protein is a potent growth signal in plant eaters, and if herbivores are exposed to animal proteins during their adulthood, the animal protein can activate growth genes, which in adults are oncogenes, or cancer-causing genes, that then stimulate abnormal cell development, growth that leads to tumor development, and ultimately can cause cancer formation. And I already mentioned there's a difference between growth, which is trying to increase the number of cells and their size, versus hypertrophy, which is only increasing the size of a cell in response to a physiologic stimulus. All right, animal protein turns on a suite of growth genes called mTOR genes and increases the levels of growth hormones like insulin-like growth factor. mTOR genes function as master regulatory growth genes for cell growth and proliferation. So what the mTOR genes do is not only do they tell your cells to multiply and grow, they also tell the cells to not die off. So the net effect is for the animal to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which again is exactly what you want in an infant mammal. It is exactly what you don't want in an adult mammal. And again, those genes should normally only be active when the animal is very young. And it turns out that the primary amino acid that is responsible for turning on the mTOR genes is an amino acid called leucine. Okay? And I want you to remember that name. What did I say?
Leucine.
Okay. Because for years, conventional nutritionists said plant proteins weren't as nutritious as animal proteins. You know why? They have less leucine. And Americans, we think more, a little is good, but more is better. And so they figured since the animal proteins had more leucine, that meant that they were better for you. Well, no, it's good if you're growing, but not if you're an adult. Okay? So think of it this way. If you're trying to build a house, you need a semi-truck that's going to, say, deliver you a flatbed of lumber at least once a week, right? But if your house is already built, you don't need that much lumber because you can't use it. And what's going to happen if you have a flatbed of lumber being dropped off in your lawn every week? What's going to happen?
It's gonna rot.
Yeah, you're going to end up with a big pile of lumber, which biologically is it starts with a T.
Trash.
No.
Tree.
A big pile of lumber on your lawn, a big pile in your body is a tumor. This is real straightforward, ladies and gentlemen. You keep stimulating your cells to grow and they keep heaping up, you end up with a tumor. If you're lucky, it's a benign tumor. It's only a big lipoma that makes you look like you're hiding a golf ball under your skin. But if you're not lucky, it's a cancer. Decreasing animal protein decreases not only mTOR activity, but it also suppresses insulin-like growth factor 1 levels, or IGF-1 levels. And that's critically important because all of the blood that is drained from your digestive tract passes through your liver. When your liver sees these amino acids from the animal proteins, it thinks, oh, I'm supposed to help the body grow. So it starts cranking out IGF-1, which is a very powerful growth hormone. And what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that human cancers are covered with receptors for IGF-1. Okay, so the more IGF-1 you have, the more those cancers are going to grow. Studies have shown that IGF-1 levels are 9 to 13% lower in men and women eating plant-based diets compared to meat eaters. And in a very important landmark study that was done over an 18-year period, they showed that those who ate higher amounts of animal protein had a 75% higher overall mortality. So they had a 75% higher chance of dying from any cause and a 4-fold increase in cancer death. So this is science. I'm not just sitting here. I assure you, I am not Kellyanne Conway. I am not sitting up here making stuff up. I am telling y'all the truth, okay?
Do you just elaborate higher animal protein than those who ate none? Or
No, those who ate the lowest amount. And this is actually the graph. It's like, this is from the study. So just this, what was surprising to me was how modest the difference was. So you can see in the hatched graph are the people who ate the lowest amount of protein in this study. This was considered low versus the people who ate the highest amount. So, I mean, it's maybe about, I think this is nanograms per ml. That's IGF levels. You know what? I have to apologize because I don't know what the amounts were in terms of the differences in protein, but it wasn't massive. It was significant, but not massive. Ted, do you remember off the top of your head? But
you're making the point that this little decrease in IGF.
Sure. And right. And this is also critically important. That what they showed was that if people were eating plant protein, they did not have higher mortality from cancer or a higher overall mortality. So the plant proteins don't drive cancer, and they don't increase your risk of dying. That's key. Okay? All right. So this is just to show you the different amounts of leucine in various foods. And what you will see is that in the plant foods, there is enough leucine to keep you healthy, but not enough to turn on cancer genes. And I even shudder to call things like eggs and animal tissue food because we shouldn't be eating them in the first place. But again, mTOR genes are upregulated in human cancers. Leucine has the greatest effect in turning on these TOR genes. And animal protein increases both TOR expression and IGF-1 levels, as we previously discussed. We also find that animal proteins are much higher in their methionine, which is a sulfur-containing amino acid. And studies have shown that methionine accelerates mitochondrial aging and oxidation, which will also accelerate your aging.
What are the units on there?
Huh?
What are the units for leucine? Those micrograms or milligrams?
Yes, it's milligrams.
Per...
I think it's milligrams per 100 grams. But thank you for pointing that out, and I will have that slide modified so that that's clear. The sulfur-containing amino acids are methionine and cysteine. Animal proteins have much higher levels of sulfur-containing amino acids than plant proteins, and in animal proteins, methionine predominates over cysteine. This is important because research shown that certain cancers are methionine dependent, meaning that they are the more methionine that is present, the faster they grow. And in fact, some cancer therapies were targeted or aimed at trying to restrict methionine availability to these cancers to try and slow their growth. Plant proteins have proportionately lower amounts of the sulfur-containing amino acids, and the primary sulfur-containing amino acid in plant proteins is cysteine. It predominates over methionine, which is good because cysteine actually boosts our immune function. Studies have shown that diets with elevated amounts of the sulfur-containing amino acids are also linked to higher risk of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, what's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and accelerated aging due to the mitochondrial oxidative damage that I mentioned before. The sulfur-containing amino acids are more prevalent in meat than vegetables and legumes, and reducing their intake is thought to explain some of the health benefits that we observe with plant-based diet. And as I said, cysteine is the more prevalent sulfur-containing amino acid in plant foods and has been shown to boost our immune function. Yes, sir.
2 questions.
Uh-huh.
So why can some adults live their whole life eating the standard American diet with lots of meat
Sure.
and not develop any cancers?
That's a very good question. Did everybody hear his question? He said, why is it that some adults can go their whole life eating what we know is not a healthy diet and they seem to have no ill effects? Well, that's the same question about, there are certain people who can drink, to excess and still live to be 70, 80 years old.
Or smoke cigarettes.
Or smoke cigarettes, right? In fact, my maternal grandmother lived to be 86 and smoked till she was 83. So, should I conclude that cigarettes are good for your health? No. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, life is not a race to the grave. The point of living is not to get to some predetermined age and then drop dead. So my point is that, because people tell me this all the time. Well, my grandfather lived to be, 82 and he ate it. Well, my point is, if he had taken care of himself, he might have lived to be 102. My goal is to be 110, and then I'm going to reevaluate whether I want to keep going. So the point is that, there are people who are genetically more resistant to the damage caused by any given dietary component. But if they had eaten differently, if my grandmother had not smoked for 83 years, she might still be here. And the same is true for people who eat the standard American diet. If they ate differently, they could be like the Okinawan octogenarians living well into their hundreds and being healthy and active and vital. Yes, ma'am.
What about the fact that people who eat whole food plant-based diets get cancer?
Okay. That's, again, very good question. So what she says, well, what about the fact that even some people who eat a whole food, plant-based diet and live a healthy lifestyle still get cancer? The fact is that our risk for any given disease is not, and we're going to talk about this when I get to the epigenetics aspect of this, is not just dependent on what I do in my lifestyle. It turns out that what your great-grandparents and grandparents and parents ate and did affects your level of disease risk. And so what you're doing is modifying the disease risk you have been handed. And some of us have been dealt a very bad hand. But the fact is that still, even if you've been dealt a bad hand, if you live a healthy lifestyle, that's going to mitigate to a great degree the bad genetics that you may be dealing with. And in most cases, even for those people who have been whole food plant-based who've gotten bad diseases, most of them will survive diseases that would kill most other people. And just today we were talking about a vegan blogger by the name of Karen Hartglass. I don't know if many of you know her. Karen had stage 4 ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer is a death sentence. Karen went through, she was a healthy vegan. She had the breast cancer. Karen is somewhere between 10 and 15 years out. She survived it. That's almost unheard of. Now she worked as a chemical engineer, and she's also Jewish, so she thinks that this part of this may have been a genetic component from her ethnic heritage, as well as exposures to toxic chemicals that she dealt with in her livelihood. But the fact is that a disease that is almost always fatal, this woman not only survived, but she is doing well. I mean, she looks wonderfully. She's living her life to the fullest, and she is a testament to the power of a whole food plant-based diet to mitigate the oftentimes bad hand we may be dealt by life.
Was that ovarian or breast?
It was ovarian. Because believe me, again, I was just flabbergasted that she was able to survive that and do so well, because it was very advanced when it was diagnosed. Yes, sir.
So if the science is clear, why do doctors tell their patients to eat this way?
Because they're retarded. I mean, that's a rather flippant and glib answer, but the fact is that the science is clear, but unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't know the science.
They went to medical school. They studied science more than.
But not
Nutrition
Okay.
only started being taught.
Right.
in the mid-90s.
I was going to say, were you taught nutrition when you were in medical school? Were you?
No, but it wouldn't have mattered if they had taught me nutrition because it would have been for food groups.
Right. So that's what, and I went to Stanford University. Nutrition was not part of the medical school curriculum. The only thing that we were taught about were things that nobody ever sees: deficient diseases, scurvy, which I think the last case of scurvy occurred on a ship with sails.
Okay, so again, if the science is clear, why don't medical schools teach this?
Because that that's like asking me, why don't we have world peace, and why is Trump still in the White House? It's a very good question. It's a very important question, but it's a complicated question because medical schools have to. Well, let me tell you my little vignette. When I was interviewing for medical school, I was interviewing in Boston, and my interviewer asked me, what are you interested in? And I launched into my preventive medicine spiel. I want to save the world by convincing people to change their diet. He listened, and he looked at me and said, well, you know what? You don't want to end up like the dentist. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, they fluoridated the water, and now they have no patients. And I did what you should never do in an interview. I looked horrified, and he tried to clean it up by saying, well, what I mean is, in Western medicine, we operate from the disease model. We are in the business of treating sick people. We are not in the business of trying to keep people from becoming sick. And there was a lot of truth to what he said, because that is the way Western medicine is developed. Now, because at the time Western medicine was coming into its own, the things that were killing people were infectious diseases and traumas and things like that. And that's why it developed the way it did. But clearly, things have changed now, and we need to change our profession. But there's a lot of inertia. And we are trying to change it, but it's going to happen slowly. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to respond to that in the way of some resources. But the book by T. Colin Campbell called Whole goes into how research works in this country. And also the movie we talked about, What the Health, talks more about the system and why.
Yeah, there's just a lot of inertia, sadly, in this system. But we've got to change it. Yes, sir. And then I'll get to you, ma'am.
Is there data to show that you have graphs comparable for smokers, non-smokers, and avoidance of lung cancer, and animal eaters and vegan, or it seems to me they should be able to collect epidemiological data to show that the less, and in large groups of people, not anecdotes, correct, that the less animal protein you eat, the less cancer you eat.
Sure, the less there is absolutely data that shows that populations that eat less animal protein are less prone to cancer. There's and even with lung cancer, there is data that shows in non-smokers who get lung cancer, the more plant-based a person's diet, the more resistant they are. With this lecture, I had to try to focus on mechanisms as opposed to sort of providing a lot of the supporting data on each individual type of cancer. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. But yeah, that data does exist. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you were talking about why is nutrition not taught in medical school, and I just wanted to add that I just saw a young dietitian on Friday, and she asked me where I got my protein. I could not believe it.
Oh my God! See, and people wonder why Buddhists do self-immolation. I mean, All right. So anyway, bottom line, animal protein is not necessary for human health. All animal protein, red meat, poultry, fish, and dairy turns on these cancer-causing genes we talked about. All animal protein will increase your risk for early death and all types of cancers, as well as other chronic diseases. All animal protein increases inflammation in the body, which will help cancer grow and spread. It also increases oxidative stress and accelerates aging. Inflammation and oxidative stress, as I said, will help spread cancer spread and help with metastasis. Poultry, fish, and dairy are animal protein and also increase risk for all of these cancers. So this is just a graph showing worldwide the risk of cancer as graphed against daily meat consumption. The more meat a nation eats, the higher their rate of colon cancer. Very straightforward. And then processed meats are just like the gangsters, classified by the World Health Organization as a class 1 carcinogen, same class as cigarettes. Hot dogs, sausage, luncheon meats, ham, smoked and cured meats, and bacon are all processed meats. Nitrites used to cure these processed meats form what are called nitrosamines in the body, which are potent carcinogenic agents that attack and damage our DNA, which will increase the risk for a wide variety of cancers. And get this, pregnant women who eat hot dogs at least 5 times a week have a much higher risk of having children who have brain tumors, which is the number 2 pediatric cancer. Children who frequently eat hot dogs have 10 times the risk of developing childhood leukemias, which is the number 1 pediatric cancer. This stuff is well known. Why isn't it talked about? Come to the Dietary Guidelines Committee and you'll find out why it isn't talked about and people don't know this. Childhood leukemia and brain cancers have been increasing at more than twice as fast as other childhood cancers over the last 2 decades. And processed meats increase the risk for bladder, endometrial, prostate, thyroid, throat, esophageal, gastric, and colorectal cancers, among others. And guys, we don't get away scot-free because studies also show that men that frequently eat processed meats, such as hot dogs, also have children who have a higher risk of having leukemia. So, ladies and gentlemen, processed meat kills.
So why haven't we put a label on the hot dogs just like on
We're trying because the hot dog lobby is so strong.
USDA.
Yeah, it's that. See, that's the. Thank you for mentioning that because when people think of the dietary guidelines, I think most Americans, like I was initially, are naive enough to think that the dietary guidelines are under the purview of Health and Human Services. The dietary guidelines come out of the USDA. And the USDA is primarily concerned with increasing the market for animal agriculture. And right, exactly. And so they will not allow the most rigorous guidelines to come out because it would eviscerate animal agribusiness. And so we always end up with these compromised recommendations. All right, heme iron is iron that has been incorporated into animal tissue. Is also sometimes referred to as organic iron. It's found in high amounts in red meat and other muscle tissues. Our bodies cannot block the absorption of heme iron. Your body sees heme iron, it automatically absorbs it. And you might say, well, why is that? The reason is your body assumes that if it sees heme iron, that heme iron is coming from your body. Because every day we slough off the lining of our digestive tract, digest those cells, and recycle the iron and other components that make up those cells. So your body is assuming that if you've already absorbed this heme iron, or this iron, you need it, so it automatically absorbs it. But our bodies can regulate the absorption of inorganic iron that you get from plant foods. So what that means is that if you're eating a lot of animal foods, you're going to get unnaturally high levels of heme iron. Heme is an activated form of iron that catalyzes many reactions throughout the body. Excess levels of iron in the body are associated with increased risk for cancer, heart disease, and infection. Heme iron can promote cancer because it damages cell membranes, forms what are called reactive oxygen species and other free radicals that damage DNA and cell membranes. It's been shown to increase pre-neoplastic lesions in a number of tissues when it's in contact with the GI tract for extended periods of time, as it does when people are eating lots of meat. It damages the colon mucosa and leads to changes that ultimately can form polyps that lead to cancer. Heme iron forms compounds that are toxic, and this is the part that blew my mind when I was researching for this lecture. It turns out heme ions will form compounds that are toxic to normal cells, meaning they'll kill the normal cells, but doesn't kill precancerous cells. Catalyze formation of what are called N-nitrosyl compounds. So you remember we were talking about those nitrates? When those nitrates that are in cured meats come in contact with heme iron, they form these toxic N-nitrosyl compounds. And it also alters your colonic flora in your colon to types of bacteria that cause a lot more cytotoxic damage that result in crypt hyperplasia that can lead to cancer development. Then you have what are called heat-generated mutagenic carcinogens. This is why people die when they eat meat. I mean, it's like the roll call. Heterocyclic amines and polyaromatic hydrocarbons are formed when you cook muscle meat at very high temperatures of greater than 260 degrees. How many of you are Jewish in here? And how many of you are Jewish and read your Torah? What did God tell the Jews about the way that they were supposed to prepare meat? They were to drain it of the blood. And then how were they supposed to cook it? They're supposed to boil it. And by boiling it, they would never have gotten it above 260 degrees. Because when it goes above 260 degrees, that's when you get these cancer-forming heterocyclic and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I'm telling you, there is science in the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. God knew what he was doing. So these heterocyclic amines, PAHs, have been shown to increase risk for kidney, colon, lung, breast, and pancreatic cancers. They're mutagenic because they cause DNA damage that can lead to cancerous transformation in normal tissue. In one study, consumption of processed meat, fried and stir-fried meat, and these heterocyclic amines were correlated with the level of DNA mutations in breast cancer tissue that were considered precancerous lesions. There's one particular type of heterocyclic amine called FIP. I can't even begin to pronounce the chemical name for that. But what's important about this particular heterocyclic amine is that it has extra estrogenic activity. In other words, it acts like an estrogen and activates the estrogen receptor on cancer cells. So you've got like a multiple whammy going on, increasing the risk for breast cancer, which is again why you see higher levels of breast cancer in Western countries where women eat a lot of meat versus other places where they don't. Then you have bacterial toxins and inflammatory compounds, and this is where you get things like TMAO. The carnitine and choline in red meat, poultry, eggs, and dairy can be converted by the bacteria in the colon of people who eat meat into TMAO, which would damage blood vessels and also damage cells and can lead to both heart disease, stroke, and cancer. Turns out that people who eat a plant-based diet don't have the type of bacteria that create TMAO. And even if you feed them a dose of carnitine or choline, they won't form the TMAO because they don't have those toxic bacteria. So eat your veggies. Habitual consumption of choline, carnitine containing animal foods by people with these TMAO producing strains has been shown, again, to increase the risk for cancer and cancer-related death. And then, of course, there's dietary animal fat. And this is something I want you guys to really get. This is the second thing that I want you guys to take home from this lecture. Now, how many of you have read in the news or saw that Time magazine, that fat don't matter, butter is back, all that sort of nonsense? Well, most of you were probably not able to really understand what was going on. What was going on, if you read the study carefully, is that they were looking and comparing people who were eating around 29% fat per calories to people who were eating up to 40+% fat per calories. And they said, we don't see any risk reduction between the low fat, 29% fat per calories, and the 40% fat per calories, so fat doesn't matter. All right, you with me? What is it about these graphs that tells you that they were full of, that they needed more fiber in their diet. And you cannot tell me, neither can you, Ted. Remember, in these studies, the lowest intake of fat was 29%, and they were comparing that to 40%. You can, no.
Low fat
No.
is 29%.
Huh?
Yeah.
Low fat is not
So, all right,
29%.
come up here and show me 29% on this graph. Yeah, we'll just say 30%.
Okay. Well, here's 30.
Okay, so 30% is right here. And where's 40?
Right next to it.
You see that? Those people were already plateaued.
30.
This is showing breast cancer development as a function of fat. Down here is colon cancer. Again, 30% versus 40%. They're already plateaued. It doesn't matter. If you want to reduce your risk of getting cancer as a function of fat, how low do you need to get your fat content?
15.
10, 15.
10 to 15, exactly. Is that not clear to anybody? Because we're not moving until everybody gets this. Do you understand that? Does this make sense to you? How about you, ma'am?
Absolutely.
Okay.
How did they get to produce a study that even said 29%? Who picked that number out?
They did, because they're full of shit. Excuse my language.
Well, for most
I mean, it angers me when people put out deliberately misleading science that is in support of industry when people are going to die because of it.
And they're just gonna profit.
That's just wrong.
Well, the other thing is that 29% in the standard American diet is low fat.
Well,
So they just tested high fat and low fat.
yeah, that's like saying Kim Kardashian is a moral woman. So anyway, there's additional data that shows, for instance, from the Nurses' Health study, they showed that the women who had the lowest amounts of fat in their diet had decreased their breast cancer risk by more than 22%. In the China, other studies showed that reducing the amount of fat in your diet can significantly delay or halt the progression of prostate cancer. And animal fat has been consistently shown to be the most problematic form of fat and the most potent when it comes to increasing the risk of cancers as it relates to fat. And here's just some example: breast cancer and fat intake. When you look around the world, again, the more fat per capita a country eats, the higher the risk of breast cancer. And then when you have women who are living in Japan eating a typical Japanese diet with a low amount of fat migrate to the United States and start eating the way we do, their breast cancer risk skyrockets. And this suggests it becomes commensurate to ours, but it actually becomes a little higher than what you see. And Asian women actually have the fastest growing group when it comes to the risk of breast cancer.
No, if I could just
Sure.
add something. Anytime you see any study that says low fat diet doesn't work for X, find the original paper and see
And
what the definition of low fat was.
That is an excellent point, Ted. Thank you.
The Med study, which looked at the Mediterranean diet, they compared low fat diets to diets supplemented with nuts and diets supplemented with extra virgin olive oil. And the low fat diet was considered unhealthy, but the low fat diet was 37% calories.
Oh my God,
37.
that's hideous.
I think the other
Yeah.
arguable point is when you're saying fat doesn't matter, it's because if you substitute it with low fat processed sugary foods.
Right. That's another very good point. Thank you. Yes. All right. One thing I want to point out to you guys about dairy products is, how do you get milk from a cow? Do you just walk up to her and say, "Bessie, give me some milk"? Okay, let me ask you a different question. What's the difference between a heifer and a cow? Can you get milk from a heifer?
No. Heifer's big.
Heifer's never freshened.
Neutered?
Heifer's never had a baby.
Exactly. A heifer is a cow that has never had a calf. So you will never get milk from a heifer. I don't care how sweetly you talk to her. Okay. A cow has to be pregnant in order to give milk because she's a mother. And if she's pregnant, that means her body is full of estrogen. And this just shows you that all milk and anything made from that milk is loaded with estrogen. Okay? And that's not just a problem for the women, guys, because the estrogen gets transformed into testosterone in our bodies and raises our risk for prostate cancer. And this just shows over the lifetime of Western women, their estrogen exposure is 4 times greater than women living in Asia, and as a result, their in rural China rather, and their breast cancer risk is 5 times greater. And this is a graph looking at milk and breast cancer. Once again, same story. The more milk a country drinks, the higher their risk and rate of breast cancer because of all that ingested hormone. And this was a very recent study looking at 53,000 North American women. It was conducted over an 8-year period, and it's published in the International Journal of Epidemiology, and it showed a marked increase in breast cancer risk that was associated with milk consumption. Consuming as little as 1/4 to 1/3 a cup of milk a day was associated with a 30% increase in breast cancer risk. If they went up to 1 cup per day, the risk of breast cancer increased by 50%. And if they were drinking 2 to 3 cups per day, the risk increased to 70 to 80%. This is no joke. Dairy product consumption is also the leading risk factor for prostate cancer in men. Exposure to both the natural and synthetic hormones in dairy products increases the production of IGF-1 by the liver, and also the animal protein consumption has been linked to increasing risk for breast and prostate cancer, as well as testicular cancer, uterine, and ovarian cancer, because these cancers are all related to hormone production. Again, some people say, well, maybe it's the fat in the milk. No, it's just the milk, because this looks like skim milk that has had all of the fat removed. And again, you see the more milk, the greater the risk. And I just want to say, these graphs that I'm showing you were lent to me by T. Colin Campbell, by the way. Yes, ma'am.
How about yogurt?
Yogurt is made from milk, same thing, still full of hormones.
Even
So,
when it says non-dairy yogurt?
oh, no, non-dairy yogurt. I was about to say, non-dairy yogurt is wonderful. So soy yogurt, and someone just introduced me to yogurt made from cashew milk. That stuff was smooth and creamy. So, non-dairy yogurt, you can bathe in that. Knock yourself out. But stay away from dairy yogurt. Again, similar graph for milk and uterine cancer. More milk, more cancer. Now, this is really, really interesting. And this is estrogenic growth promoters that are used in the animal industry. Back in 1979, there was a epidemic of breast development in Italian children. They traced it to the use of this growth promoter that was used in meat, and the Italians had the good sense to stop using that growth promoter. The European Union banned the use of the growth promoter and also banned the importation of meat from America because we refuse to stop using these growth promoters. American producers continue to use these synthetic estrogens in both beef production and dairy production because it makes the animals grow faster and produce more milk. Zeranol is one that is designed to be persistent. That means it hangs around in the tissues. And some people believe it is as potent as DES, which we know was banned because it caused cancers, reproductive cancers in the daughters of women who took it. So once again, we see that American industry is exposing the American populace to very, very toxic drugs and hormones in the food supply. All right, what about refined carbohydrates? Well, first, I want to give you some good news. Even though carbohydrates are eventually broken down into glucose or sugar, whole, intact, unprocessed plant foods do not in any way increase cancer risk or negatively affect our metabolism. Well, what about the processed ones? However, refined or processed carbohydrates can affect cancer risk either directly or indirectly. Indirect effects of the processed carbohydrates are mediated through insulin levels. In other words, you eat a lot of simple carbs and processed carbs, it will raise your insulin levels and increase insulin resistance, which will tend to make cells grow, including cancer cells. It also will cause you to store more fat. And we know that there's a link between excess fat on the body and the risk for a variety of cancers. Processed carbs can also affect cancer because certain cancer cells actually have a mutation which makes them preferentially use simple sugar for their metabolism, because it's just easier for them to scarf up sugar and grow very, very fast. And so if we're eating a lot of simple sugar, some people think that that can augment this cancer growth. So again, stay away from the refined carbs and eat whole plant foods. One thing I want you guys to remember, I tell people, when it comes to eating, the only white things at your dinner table should be the tablecloth and the people eating dinner. Everything else should have some color. And I may allow you to have some cauliflower. And this is just to show you how much sugar is in soda. And that, you know, the bottom line with environmental toxins is that because of bioaccumulation, if you eat animal foods, you're going to get much, much, much higher levels of these environmental toxins because they are bioconcentrated in the animal tissue. So in green, you have vegan men and women. In red, you have people eating meat. And you can see the meat eaters have much higher levels than the plant eaters. And interestingly, you notice that for both groups, the women have higher levels of these toxins. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to why?
Stores in fat.
You get the gold star for the day. Women have higher levels of fat in their body, and most of these environmental toxins are stored in fatty tissue. And that's why they tend to accumulate in women more so than men, to a greater degree in men. All right, and these toxins and heavy metals have been linked to a number of cancers and other diseases, and some of these things can persist for years. But again, some good news, whole plant foods can prevent the absorption of certain of these heavy metals by binding them. The fiber binds them, traps them in the digestive tract, and they get passed out when we eliminate them in our stools. And then let's just talk a minute about alcohol. Let's be clear, alcohol causes cancer, okay? The link between alcohol and cancer has been known for over 100 years. It increases the risk for a whole slew of cancer: oral cancer, cancer of the pharynx, liver, bladder, colorectal, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate, and melanoma. 5.8% of all cancers worldwide are linked to alcohol. Alcohol-related cancers in men are mostly oral cavity and GI. In women, it's mostly breasts. Again, a fiber-rich, plant-based diet can mitigate the effects of alcohol-related cancers. So, again, am I saying never have a drink? No, but you definitely want to be judicious in how you use alcohol, and it's always best to do it in the setting of a whole food, plant-based diet. So this is a really good question. He says, I'll have the half-pound double deluxe bacon steer burger, please. And the clerk asked him, you want some chemotherapy with that? Because you're going to need it. All right, here's our second story. This is Donna Green Goodman.
Why do I have something to shout about? Because in 1996, who I thought lived fairly healthfully, went into my doctor for a regular checkup. And ladies, you need to go regularly every year for your annual exam with your physician and schedule one for the men and children in your life. But on this particular day, I went to see my doctor, and I'd had a history of fibrocystic breast disease. And this year, we had been following a lump in my breast. And the doctor said, why don't we just do a mammogram, Donna, this time. I was 37 years old. We did the mammogram, and I kept getting phone calls. The final phone call I got was, you have cancer. And I'm thinking, there's no way. I work for Morehouse School of Medicine. I teach people how not to get it. I'm college educated. My husband and I make enough money. I go to the doctor. I eat healthfully. I exercise. How in the world did this happen to me? I had one surgery. They took the lump out. I had another surgery. They went under my arm and took out lymph nodes. Of the 17 lymph nodes that they took out, there was cancer in 6 of them. I was told by my physician that I was guaranteed to die within 2 to 5 years. They recommended that I have chemotherapy, a stem cell transplant, more chemotherapy, radiation, and tamoxifen. And as a health educator, I was trained at Loma Linda University, which has a rich history of looking at the effect of diet and lifestyle on the impact or incidence or prevalence of disease. I was a little concerned because nobody was saying to me, Donna, you have this disease. As a matter of fact, one doctor in particular kept saying, we don't know why you have this, and there's nothing that you can do, and you should listen to me and do what I say. Well, I couldn't just do that because I'm trained as a health educator. I knew a little bit more, and I believe in a Creator God who says that above all things, He wishes that we would prosper and be in health. And so I got on my knees and I talked to my Creator, and I decided that I would radically change my lifestyle. I changed how I slept. I changed how I exercised. I got outside and got plenty of sunlight. I changed my way of eating. And here I am almost 13 years later, depending on when you're viewing this video, and I'm free of the cancer and the constipation and the uterine fibroids and the hair loss and the weight gain and the heart rhythms that were irregular and the insomnia and so many other complications of making poor lifestyle decisions. So when you get information about your health, don't just take the first thing, go and compare. And if you believe like I believe, compare it to what the Creator God has also put out there for you to learn. One of the first things that I discovered was the beautiful bounty of plants that we find on the face of the earth and the benefits that are associated with them. And I started eating from the bounty of the land in as close to nature a state as possible.
All right. One of the things that Donna didn't go into was that Donna was raised some of the evidence, and she was a lacto-ovo vegetarian when she got her cancer. But after she was diagnosed, that's when God led her to become strictly vegan. And again, I pulled this video from the web, so one of these days I want to interview her so I can get more of the detailed information I want. But she again went raw for 6 to 8 months after the diagnosis. And that's when she said all of her tumor markers went to zero. The problems that she had been having with fibrocystic changes in her breast cleared up. The fibroids that she had in her uterus, she stopped having that problem. And she's been smooth sailing since then. So again, the things that you guys are hearing over and over from these people who've cured themselves with their diet is they went raw vegan, cut out all the animal food, all of the dairy, and they also tried to cut out toxic chemicals that may have been in their homes as well. And I think these are important points. So what are some of the benefits of a plant-based diet? Well, they're loaded with fiber, protective phytochemicals, plant enzymes, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, plant sterols and stanols, pre and probiotics, macronutrients from healthy sources, and micronutrients from healthy sources. And why are plant-based diets so effective? Well, they're effective because they actually address the actual causes of cancer. So we've seen that cancer is caused by these growth genes like mTOR, which are activated by animal protein. Growth hormones like insulin and insulin-like growth factor, which again are increased by animal protein. You don't have that problem with the plant-based diet. You get the DNA damage that comes from the heme iron and free radicals and reactive oxygen species, liver peroxidation that's caused by heme iron, persistent organopollutants, biotoxins that are found in the animal foods. You get animal hormone-stimulated growth of cancer cells. You get inflammation caused by animal fat, bacterial toxins, and antigen that promotes the growth of cancer cells. Plant-based diets turn on tumor suppressor genes, and plant-based diets contain high levels of anti-inflammatory antioxidants and protective phytochemicals, and plant-based diets contain compounds that actually kill and suppress cancer cells. And one of the ways they do this is through their epigenetic effects. Epigenetics literally means above the genome, And studies on diet and environment show that what we eat actually changes our DNA. It used to be thought that the DNA you were born with was set in stone. We now know that all of our DNA is wrapped by these proteins that are called histone proteins. And depending on the kind of diet you eat, if you eat a plant-based diet, then those histone proteins get what are called methyl and ethyl groups attached to them that actually turn off cancer genes and turn on tumor suppressor genes. But if you're not eating a plant-based diet, you don't get that beneficial modification of the histone proteins, and it makes it much more likely that the cancer genes will turn on. So again, with the recent belated recognition that the long stretches of DNA that used to be called junk DNA were actually regulatory sections of the DNA, it became clear to people that in fact most of your DNA doesn't actually code for proteins. Most of your DNA is actually there to regulate how your genes are transcribed. And the food that you eat governs how those regulatory genes are read. Okay, because the regulatory genes outnumber the functional genes by a ratio of 51. So in other words, your diet controls your DNA. All right, I want everybody to say that. Diet controls your DNA. Controls your DNA. So that's why you can never look at a piece of junk food and think, I can eat this because it's going to be okay. Because you're like, this stuff's going to jack up my DNA. I can't have this. So all DNA, as we said, is coded and protected by these histone proteins, which are modified by methylation and acetylation through plant foods consumed in the diet. These changes affect gene transcription rates for many genes, including the cancer genes and tumor suppressor genes. Epigenetic effects are analogous to, as I said, hardware versus software. And these influences are heritable, meaning they can be passed down. So if you're a flatworm, you can pass them down up to 40 generations. Okay, but of course flatworms only live 2 weeks. In human beings, epigenetic effects have been documented out to 3 and 4 generations. Okay, so again, the risk that you carry has been affected by what your grandparents and great-grandparents did, as well as your parents. Epigenetics of cancer is well studied. Cancer cells are often lose, and cancers have many genes that have lost their normal methyl attachments. And again, that can come from eating a diet that is low in plant foods. In a paper published in the British Journal of Nutrition in 2009, Thaler showed changes in epigenetic regulation of an enzyme called human mitochondrial superoxide dismutase. And that's important because that helps kill off bad guys. And you want that gene active. And if it's not active, it's much more likely that you will get negative changes in your cell. And this is super important. Dr. Dean Ornish, in a study published in The Lancet in 2008, showed increased telomerase activity after putting people on a plant-based diet for only 3 months. Again, Robbie, I don't want to hear from you. Why is telomerase activity important? What are telomeres, first of all?
Well,
The
it
end of
controls.
the
Oh, you don't?
I do not.
The end
No.
of the DNA.
Huh?
It's the end of the DNA.
It's the end of the DNA. And why are telomeres important?
The longer they are,
Protect.
the longer they are, the usually later you live.
Exactly. The longer your telomeres are, the longer you will live. I know you know it. That's why I don't want you to answer. But more than that, it also means the more disease resistant you are. So if you got long telomeres, not only will you live long, but you will be more resistant to chronic disease. So you want that telomerase activity to be working at full throttle. And you can have that if you eat your plant foods. And this is a
To
video
recap,
from
the traditional
Gregor.
model of how fruits and vegetables protect against cancer is that their antioxidants prevent the buildup of free radicals, also known as reactive oxygen species, ROS, which would otherwise go on to damage our cellular DNA, membranes, etc., which could lead to the transformation of healthy cells into damaged, diseased, or dying cells. But in that landmark 2003 kiwi fruit study, we learned that there's a second pathway as well. Phytonutrients actually modulate gene expression and can increase our cellular defenses, such that even if there is some damage to our DNA, our cells may recover instead of being irreparably lost. The Kiwi study looked at one of those defenses, one DNA repair enzyme, but there are many ways our cells repair our DNA. We don't mess around when it comes to protecting our genes. So question number one, what effect does kiwi fruit consumption have on all these other defenses? And question number two, what if we branch out and test multiple fruits and veggies at the same time? You'll remember that there did not seem to be a dose response with the kiwis, right? As far as this DNA repair enzyme was concerned, you were either eating kiwis or not. It didn't really matter how many. But man cannot live on kiwis alone. What if you did a mix of fruits and veggies? Could we break through that ceiling? Now, studies are expensive, particularly if the Kiwi people refuse funding because you have the audacity to test other fruit. So they wanted to make this study count. So when they designed their plant portfolio, they went all out. Check it out. Green tea, rosehip juice, berries, pomegranate, dark blue grapes, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, red cabbage, kale, blue potatoes, dark chocolate, walnuts, rosemary, oregano. This study is making me hungry. I don't know if you noticed, but this is that same amazing research group that blessed the world with that study of thousands of different foods. They knew what they were doing. Okay, long story short, plant-based diets can prevent development of several chronic age-related diseases, blah, blah, blah. We know that. Yes, but how, and what about that plateau effect? This is what they did. 3 groups. The antioxidants to the teeth group compared to the 3 kiwi a day group compared to control. Took blood from everyone, and then, for the first time ever reported, did this microarray analysis where you can measure the effects of a plant-based diet on expression of hundreds of different genes at a time. The first to investigate the influences of healthy diets on gene expression in whole blood. This was the study. All right, well, the Kiwi group was able to significantly regulate not just one gene, as I showed in the 2003 study, but a total of 5. Meanwhile, the berry group significantly regulated 5 times more, 25 genes. Conclusion: the observed changes in blood cell gene expression profiles suggest that the beneficial effects of a plant-based diet on human health may be
Sorry that cut off a little bit, but basically maybe mediated through the impact of all of these different plant foods. So the benefits of plant-based diets are found in cruciferous vegetables, whole intact grains, beans, legumes. By the way, beans and legumes have been shown to have a very potent anti-tumor effect. And if I were to ask you just name some of the nastiest substances on earth that you would hate to put your hand in, what would you guys say? Fresh cow manure? Maybe fresh cow manure mixed with like some dirt by the railroad track? Well, that's pretty bad. All right. Okay. Well, all right. So let's say I got some vomit, a fresh cow patty, and some just some dirt. Mix it all together, and took a pinto bean and put it in there. What would happen? You would get a beautiful pinto bean plant. That is how powerful beans are. Okay. The nastiest stuff that if you put that into a cut on your body, you'd be rushed to the hospital within 24 hours. Beans are so potent and so powerful, they can actually still produce a disease-free, pristine plant. Eat your beans. You want to make sure that your vegetables have color, because the greater the color, the more potent the antioxidant activity. And again, fiber is not one thing. All plant foods have fiber, and all different plant foods have different fibers. And the greater the variety, the better it is for us. Anti-cancer compounds and plants include all of these things, and this is only, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very limited list, but it's the sulforaphane, the carbanols, the isocyanates, the liminoids, the phytosterols, phytophenols, flavonoids, tannins, curcumin, resveratrol. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. We have yet to characterize all the things that are in plant foods. And also importantly, studies have shown time and again, you can't extract these things and expect to get the same benefit from eating the whole food, because it needs to be in the intact plant to give you the full benefit, because the other compounds in the plant act synergistically. You get decreased incidence of cancer in plant-based populations, as was shown time and time again. Adventist Health Studies, both 1 and 2, show decreased incidence of cancers in the plant-based Adventists vis-a-vis those who are still eating meat. And studies have shown in the past that people who have been diagnosed with cancer, who include more plant foods in their diet, have increased disease-free survival, greater likelihood of cure, and a greater time to recurrence. And lastly, multiple studies show that patients diagnosed with cancer who change their plant-based diet. Oh, I already just mentioned that. All right. So blood from men with prostate cancer who have been on plant-based diets for 1 year were dripped on cell cultures containing prostate cancer cells, and look what happened vis-a-vis those who were just controls. They killed off 70% of the cancer cells. Dean Ornish was able to show that he was able to arrest the progression of biopsy-proven prostate cancer by putting patients on a plant-based diet. And they decided to look at women with breast cancer, but they said, we don't want to wait a year, so we're going to just put them on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks. And again, this is the cell culture before they dripped the blood on it. And when they dripped the blood on it from the women who were plant-based, you can see it killed off the vast majority of the cancer cells. So again, the blood from plant-based population is toxic to cancer cells. And fiber has anti-cancer effects because their phytoestrogens and lignans are components of fiber, and when we eat them, they are activated by the bacteria in our colon. And what was shown is that breast cancer risk was reduced by 22% for women with the highest lignan intake. Lignans are found in your whole grains and beans, whole grain rye, and decreased PSA in men with prostate cancer by 14%. Consumption of soy phytoestrogens reduces breast cancer and prostate cancer risk in a dose-dependent fashion, meaning the more you eat, the lower your risk. Metabolism of phytoestrogens by these bacterial strains in our colon can make these phytoestrogens more bioavailable and therefore more effective. And the ones that are most effective at activating these phytoestrogens are, of course, those that are associated with a plant-based diet. And again, here's a couple videos.
From a recent review on diet and inflammation by Dr. Leo Galland, who, when I was a kid, actually used to be my doctor. Inflammation has recently emerged as an important aspect of the development of age-related infirmity and the major chronic diseases of industrialized societies: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer. And we have markers of inflammation now, like C-reactive protein, which are easy to measure and give a sense of how much inflammation there is in our bodies, which is predictive for the development of some of these diseases. We know plant-based food in general have anti-inflammatory effects, particularly fruits and vegetables, but not all plant foods. From a 2010 review, extra virgin olive oil decreases inflammatory markers compared to corn oil or non-virgin oil. Tomato juice helps, but raw tomatoes don't appear to. Walnuts, red wine, and flax meal work. Garlic powder doesn't. Mixed data on tea, but sweet cherries do seem to decrease inflammation. There have since been a few new studies to add to this list, one showing that those eating just 4 servings of legumes a week, lentils, chickpeas, peas, beans, dropped C-reactive protein levels a whopping 40% in 2 months. And then, apparently the first study ever to address the effects of potato consumption on oxidation and inflammation in humans was published. And And not just any potatoes, there's all sorts of new varieties out there. First, though, they looked at regular potatoes, white russet potatoes. One steamed potato a day for 6 weeks. Inflammation, as measured by C-reactive protein levels in the blood, tended to go up. Next, potatoes with yellow flesh did a bit better, but neither were significantly different than baseline. Only purple potatoes with purple flesh significantly decreased inflammation. And same thing was found for oxidation. In this 2012 study, within hours of consumption, purple potatoes increased the antioxidant capacity of one's bloodstream, whereas white potato starch appeared to have a pro-oxidant effect. And purple potatoes also appeared to help lower blood pressure in folks with hypertension. They put people on 6 to 8 small microwave purple potatoes a day and concluded purple potatoes are an effective hypotensive agent and lower the risk of heart disease and stroke in hypertensive subjects without weight gain. Combined with a reduction in inflammation and DNA damage, purple potatoes offer consumers an improved nutritional choice in potato consumption.
Purple potatoes offer consumers an improved nutritional choice in potato consumption.
Do all these anti-inflammatory plant foods actually have an impact on inflammatory disease mortality, though? A recent study out of Australia reported the results of following about 2,500 older adults in their diets for 15 years. During that time, about 200 died of inflammatory diseases, and so the researchers tried to calculate what it was about the diets of the survivors that seemed to help the most, and it was nuts. Half a walnut a day appeared to cut the risk of dying from inflammatory disease in about half. In the study, increasing the consumption of nuts by as little as 1.4 grams a day, that's about half the weight of a penny, was associated with a reduced 49% risk of dying from chronic inflammation-related diseases. That's like 1 almond a day. Fish consumption didn't seem to do a thing. Our data indicates a protective role of nuts, but not fish, against inflammatory disease mortality. This may help explain why most studies done to date on those eating vegetarian or vegan show significantly less inflammation in their bodies compared to meat eaters. There have been a dozen studies so far. 4 showed no significant difference, and 8 showed significantly less inflammatory markers in those eating vegetarian. Here's the latest. A vegetarian diet was associated with lower inflammation levels, lower levels of C-reactive protein, which is in accordance with research showing vegetarians have a lower risk of heart disease and improved antioxidant and inflammatory status.
Vegetarians have a lower risk of heart disease and improved antioxidant and inflammatory status.
All right, and here are a list of a number of different compounds and their antioxidant capacity. It's called oxygen radical absorption, or ORAC capacity. And you will see that the berries are leading the list, but that all plant foods have significant antioxidant capacity. They fall into a number of different classes, and this is why we want to eat all of our various plant foods. All right. And then we go to fruit antioxidants. And again, they fall into different categories, but they're all great and do wonderful things for us. Believe me, I could have kept you here all night showing you these slides, but it's just, plant foods are just amazing. Now let's look at a couple of success stories. This is a manual that I was telling you about. And I'm going to have to turn around to read this because it's too small for me to read here. So I was an athlete competing in the 100 and 200 meter events and trained for the Olympics in 2004. It was at that time I began eating a lot of red meat because that is what I thought would make me strong and build muscle. I gradually Started to notice a change in my bowel habits and began to find blood in my stools. I eventually went to see a physician. Was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer in 2014. I was told I would only live 2 years unless I did chemotherapy and surgery for treatment. This is where I decided to find the reasons that brought me into that situation instead of seeking a temporary and questionable chemical solution. Started exploring alternative therapies of treatment and holistic therapies. I traveled to Asia to seek a master of holistic healing who would help me in my situation. And that is how I completely changed my nutrition style, my habits, my priorities, my way of thinking, and ultimately myself. I feel I was actually reborn. From that point on, I decided to live my life as a different person with a higher purpose in life. I completely changed my diet so that it contained no dairy, no meat, no soya, no GMO, no refined, processed, or packaged foods, no gluten, and no sugar. I only consume fresh salads and juices, drank only filtered water, alkaline water with a pH of 9. I use herbs for immune support like propolis, slippery elm, astragalus, wormwood, black walnut, clove, chlorella, and coriander seeds. I also utilize colon hydrotherapy, cryotherapy, ozone therapy. I was mixing turmeric, fresh garlic, ginger, apple cider vinegar, oregano, manuka honey, and lemon. I was also drinking grapefruit, celery, and other juices every day. I also did coffee, wheatgrass, and probiotic enemas. And over a 6 to 8 month period after changing my diet and lifestyle, my follow-up scan showed that the colon cancer had completely regressed and disappeared. I'm now 6 years cancer-free. And I will just say to you that I think many of the things that Emmanuel did were not necessarily necessary, but this is his story, so I wanted to tell it as he told it. But again, the things that you see that are consistent with the other stories is he went raw vegan. And I think that's what's key. All right, here's another story. Frank Smith. In August of 2013, I was diagnosed with hepatocellular carcinoma, that's cancer of the liver, and cirrhosis after a night of severe abdominal pain. I had a CT scan, ultrasound, and an MRI of my liver. This showed lesions in the right half of the liver, 2 large tumors and several small ones. I also had a history of hepatitis C. I had elevated liver enzymes, and my alpha-fetoprotein, which is a protein that comes from liver cancer, was elevated at 205. Normal is 0 to 8. In September of 2013 to October of 2013, I saw a team at Georgetown Hospital, Lombardi Cancer Center, who wanted me to take chemotherapy. They gave me 6 months to live. So the chemotherapy they wanted him to do was palliative, not curative. He then went to see a doctor at Washington Hospital Center who wanted to do a biopsy and remove half of his liver. Again, that would have been palliative surgery because it would not have been curative. And he was told to make end-of-life plans because he was going to die. Instead, he prayed and got some hope. He researched whether any of the proposed treatment plans would have cured him, and none of them would. Surgery wouldn't cure him because when his liver regrew, it would still have Hep C, and which would make the cancer likely to recur. Plus, he had cirrhosis, and a cirrhotic liver almost always grows back abnormally and would likely not have been a normal liver. Chemo has very poor results with liver cancer, and radiation has dreadful results and does not result in a cure. But he found some other information that pointed to natural cures for diet change, including video testimonies of people who had changed their diet. So in October of 2013, he began to make diet changes in earnest. What did he do? He started juicing. He began eating organic raw foods, turmeric, distilled water, eliminated all animal products, meat and dairy, and processed foods, sugar, and processed oils from his diet. He removed harmful chemicals in his personal household products and tried to reduce his stress. His alpha-fetoprotein was up to 495, T-bili, alk-phos, all of his liver enzymes were elevated from November of 2013 to March of 2014. Although his alpha-fetoprotein continued to increase, his other numbers began to come down, By June of 2014, his liver enzymes were within normal limits. He had a CAT scan in August of 2014 that showed that his liver cancer was gone. And there was still scarring from the cirrhosis, but the liver cancer was gone. In November of 2015, in August, so a year later, in August of 2015, a follow-up CAT scan showed that not only had the cancer not come back, but even the scarring from the cirrhosis had resolved, which is pretty amazing. And so in November of 2015, he did some research and decided to do the medication Harvoni for the hepatitis C. And because although the cancer was gone, he still had the hep C. And after 12 weeks of Harvoni, he was negative for hep C. His alpha-fetoprotein had come down to 9.5. Liver enzymes were within normal limits. And then by September of 2016, his alpha-fetoprotein levels are normal. The hep C is gone. Frank is living his best life. And importantly, his entire family has become vegan, and he is working as a community educator, telling his story, getting other people to change their diet and lifestyle. Again, these are true miracles, ladies and gentlemen. And the thing that you have seen from case after case is that these people go raw vegan and their disease resolves. So I want you to remember, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change your ending. So don't waste time regretting things you can't undo or redo. Just start where you are and change the future. Now, one question that's really important is people ask, when should I change? Well, you want to change before you reach this point. Okay. And the reason I decided to put this slide here is because a number of times I've talked to patients about changing their diet, and they're like, "Oh, doc, that's a little extreme. I don't think I can." And then they go through the conventional therapy, which destroys their bone marrow, puts them into organ failure. And then when they're about to go off the cliff, when they're going into multi-organ system failure, okay, I'm ready to try, becoming a vegan. People, it may be too late. Start when you know better, do better. Animal foods are toxic and poisonous to us. They create disease, including cancer. When you know the truth, adhere to that truth. So make the change when you know about it. Yes, sir.
You're using the expression raw vegan. Does that mean, that would kind of take away cooking beans or cooking?
Okay, hold that question. I'm coming back to it. So in my epilogue, burning down the house or putting out the flames, a cancer diagnosis can clearly be one of the most terrifying and mysterious events that we will ever confront in our life. The first thing that most of us think is, how or why did this happen to me? Well, from this lecture, I hope you've seen that many of the dietary and lifestyle habits that we have practiced or been taught to practice in Western countries are the ones that increase the risk of developing certain cancers and increase the likelihood that once these cancers do develop, they will spread and resist treatment and may eventually kill us. So the question for us is, are we going to call the doctors to try and put water on the fire like these firemen while we're in the backyard throwing kerosene in the house by continuing to eat animal foods? If we do that, we're likely to burn down our house and die. If we are challenged by these diseases or we don't want to get them in the first place, we have to change the way we eat and live, not tomorrow, today. So, and again, there was absolutely good news and wonderful news in this lecture. We saw real individuals who were able to cure themselves of very dangerous, dreadful, advanced cancers by radically altering their diet and lifestyle. And can I guarantee that it's going to work for every person? Of course I can't guarantee that. But neither does conventional therapy work for every person. But it is worth giving it a try, because I can tell you there is no piece of chicken, steak, or cheese that is worth a human life. And there are dietary factors that cause and promote and drive cancers and cancer development. And if we eliminate the animal products which create and drive these diseases and embrace a healthy plant-based lifestyle, we may be able to avoid cancer altogether or reverse the disease once it develops. And in answer to your question, the question was about cooked food versus raw food. What I would say is that if someone is challenged by cancer, I would absolutely recommend that they go raw for at least 6 to 8 months, that they would try that. Now, if you are not challenged by cancer, I don't think you need to be completely raw. I mean, I do think that we should just, all of us should try and eat as much raw plant food as we can. But I don't think it's necessary to be completely raw. But certainly, if I were diagnosed with cancer, I would become completely raw for a minimum of 6 months, because the stories that I've heard from these people all over the world is they went raw, and that's what made their cancers regress. So I think if you're challenged by cancer, that is what I would do. Yes.
So what's the difference between vegan and raw vegan?
Well, vegan simply means you've eliminated all animal foods from your diet. Raw vegan means that you're not eating any cooked foods. So, yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
A vegan could eat a Pop-Tart, but a raw vegan.
Right.
Right. So I right.
Eat the apple inside.
Right. And if you're going to eat beans, sprout them as opposed to cook them, and eat your broccoli raw, your cauliflower raw, to be completely raw for that 6 month period of time. So I like to end with the story of Naaman, and then I'll open the floor for questions. Because Naaman this is a story told in the Old Testament. Naaman was a captain in the Syrian army, and he developed leprosy. And as you all know, in biblical times, leprosy was a death sentence. Not only was it incurable and uniformly fatal, but you also had to be separated from society. You had to go to a leper colony where you would slowly fall apart and eventually die. And so, needless to say, Naaman was devastated when he heard this news. But he also had a servant who was a Hebrew girl. And she said, "Master, there is a prophet in the nation of Israel who could cure your leprosy if you went to see him." And she was referring to the prophet Elisha. And so Naaman gathered up this big retinue of camels loaded with gifts, costly garments, gold, money, and took this pilgrimage to Israel, to the place where Elijah lived, sent the girl in to see him and tell him, "This is why I'm here. Can you please come out and see me?" Elisha listened to the story and told the young lady, he said, "Go out and tell him to go down to the river Jordan, bathe in the river 7 times, and he'll be cured." And she came out. She told Naaman what Elisha said, and Naaman was furious. He's like, "I came all of this way and brought all of this stuff, and this man won't even come out of that hut and see me? Furthermore, we got beautiful rivers in Syria, and he wants me to bathe in that little muddy creek, the Jordan?" And he was just about ready to storm off when his servants came to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had bid you do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? If he told you to go out and slay 5 lions or fight some battle, wouldn't you have gladly have done that to be cured of your leprosy? So why not do this simple thing he asked you and bathe in the river Jordan and see if it'll heal you?" Naaman thought about it, and he relented. He went, he bathed in the river Jordan, and when he came up the 7th time, his leprosy was healed. And I love that story because God told us originally, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And he also added, you shall eat the plants of the field. This is very simple advice. If we would only do this, we could avoid all of the surgeries, chemotherapies, and other things that happen because we wouldn't listen to our original instructions. So I want to encourage you guys, be like Naaman. Let's do the simple thing and avoid all the complicated rigmarole. And this is the reason that we need question and answer sessions, because sometimes we say one thing and people hear something else entirely. You'll see this cartoon.
You have a cartoon?
Yeah.
That's Danny Shanahan. He lives in my hometown.
Yeah, this is a New Yorker cartoon. All right. So you had a question.
We're going to officially wrap this up, actually.
Oh, okay, because people will have to go. Yeah.
It's actually 9:30. So, but
All right.
people can stick around and ask questions. But because we're making a video,
Okay.
battery's going to go dead.
Okay.
I want you to say goodbye.
All right.
Let's give them a great round of
All right. It's been my pleasure. I hope the people who will see this online will learn a lot and be able to improve their lives.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.